Hello, how's everyone doing? Let me begin. I live with my sister and her husband. My sister has been my legal guardian since I was a teenager. When I entered high school and had to start using public transportation because my school was far from home, she always tried to find routes so that I wouldn't have to take the electric train. She even went out of her way to drop me off at a corner where a minibus passed that would eventually take me to school. For some reason, she hated the electric train more than any other form of transportation. She had been through many uncomfortable situations, like people invading her personal space or odd behaviors from passengers. These were experiences she didn't want me to have to go through. However, I took the train whenever I could, without her knowing, so she wouldn't scold me. She eventually found out about a bad experience I had one night while coming home on Line 7. It was a Sunday night, but not too late, and I started to notice that the platforms and trains were becoming emptier. I was distracted on my phone when I felt a cold hand on mine. Someone had touched and squeezed the hand I was using to hold the pole. My initial reaction was discomfort and anger, but it quickly turned into confusion. Who had touched me? It was an elderly woman, probably in her 60s, who was smiling at me without saying a word. I was scared, especially because she was dressed like those people who approach you on the street offering palm readings. I nervously smiled back and moved a few steps toward the center of the train car to distance myself from her. I felt her move behind me, getting closer. I decided to hurry, and when several people got on at the next station, I took the opportunity to put more distance between us. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see she was still watching me, even through the crowd. And I couldn't stop thinking about how cold and bony her hand had felt when she touched mine. When I reached my station, I quickly got off the train, feeling very stressed, hoping that she wouldn't get off behind me. After a few more trains, I looked back to make sure she hadn't followed, and I didn't see anything, so I felt a little more relieved. But just then, I saw her appear, walking quickly toward me, almost running. I ran toward the turnstiles and thought about telling the police officer there, but quickly discarded the idea. Was I really going to tell him I was scared of an old lady who was just smiling at me? I decided to hurry and ran the 2.5 blocks to my house. The walk didn't help calm my nerves. The street was quieter and darker than usual. It seemed like the streetlights had decided to dim that night. Everyone seemed to have stayed inside. There wasn't a soul on the street, just me, running, and the feeling that the lady was still nearby, just a few stations away. I ran far enough to turn onto my street, hurrying to enter the house without making noise while closing the door, hoping she hadn't seen where I went. My sister was alone because my brother-in-law hadn't arrived yet, and when she saw me, she asked, worried, what had happened. I explained that someone was following me, and we quietly peered through a crack in the curtain. When I told my sister it was an older woman, she almost laughed. But at that exact moment, the woman appeared on the sidewalk staring at us, as if she were trying to find us. I heard my sister let out a scared sigh. There was something really strange about that woman, and my sister noticed it too. We saw her cross the street and start looking at the house across the way, all while continuing to walk. My brother-in-law arrived about half an hour later, and we went out, scared, to tell him what had happened. He went around the block but didn't see anything unusual. Although they both think it was a woman who was unbalanced, with mental health problems, I felt that there was something very strange about her. Since that night, I've never taken the electric train alone again. Have you heard of the witch on Line 3 of the electric train? I had already been told about her by people who had seen her, especially those who take that line early in the morning to go to school. Let's remember, it's the line that goes from Indios Verdes to Universidad. I don't usually take it because I don't study at the university, but once I had to take it to get to the Vivero station. On that one occasion, I happened to see her. It was very early, so early that the train was almost empty, and there weren't many people on the platforms or getting on at the stations. That day, the train was constantly stopping due to the heavy rain that had fallen the night before, and I had plenty of time, so I wasn't worried. When we arrived at the Centro Medico station, a woman with a long, torn, and completely dirty dress got on our car. She was wearing a dirty jacket, her hair was very long and tangled, and there was a look of terror in her eyes. They said she was a homeless woman, but she was a homeless woman unlike any other I've seen on the streets. At first, I didn't react right away, but then I remembered the stories from my friends. Although the details of her clothes varied from one story to another, I knew I was sharing the car with the famous witch of Line 3. All the passengers lowered their gaze, trying to ignore her, avoiding eye contact with that obviously disturbed woman, but I couldn't stop looking at her. There was something hypnotic about her wide-open eyes that seemed like they might fall out of their sockets. She noticed and stared at me from the other end of the car. Slowly, she began to walk towards me. The closer she got, the more fear took over me. I didn't know what someone in that state might do. She got so close that she stopped parked right next to me. I looked down to avoid looking into her eyes, but I knew she was watching me. I could feel her gaze fixed on me. The journey to the next station felt eternal. I just prayed, really prayed, that the lights wouldn't go out or that the train wouldn't stop in the tunnel. I could feel her breath very close to me, her fetid breath. Finally, we reached the next station, and I froze. Although I had considered running off earlier, I didn't look up. I noticed that all the other passengers got off and no one else got on. Clearly, I wasn't the only one who was terrified of that woman. When the announcement that the door was about to close sounded, the woman quickly got off, taking hurried steps. I watched her from inside the train and noticed how her gaze stayed fixed on me, terrified, yet at the same time lost. I couldn't stop looking at her as the train moved forward, and she didn't stop staring at me either. Shortly after, I told my friends that I had finally encountered that woman, the witch of Line 3. We were discussing how someone in her condition could get on the electric train. Does she buy a ticket? Why don't the police say anything to her? But at that moment, one of my friends interrupted and told me that, according to an electric train worker, all the employees already recognize her. They themselves call her the witch, but no one knows exactly at which station she gets on or gets off. They only see her wandering the platforms and getting on semi-empty cars to scare passengers. The strangest thing, they told me, is that she only appears when it has rained a lot, when the trains stop between tunnels. Some even claim she never leaves, that she lives in the tunnels. I'm thankful I don't have to travel on that line every day, because now, every time I get near the train, I'm afraid I'll run into her again.